This is Golf 5, Romeo Echo Victor, G5 REV calling CQ, standing by for any calls. Hi there YouTube, I'm Ben, I'm G5 REV, and today I have to say I'm not as chipper as I usually am. This video is about Ofcom's new EMF derivative that is going to impact all the licenses, and the more I read into it, the more grumpy I get. But let me tell you what I found out, and hopefully this will help some people in their thinking, and hopefully you'll be able to guide me as well, for those of you who have been in the hobby a bit longer, and perhaps be able to help and guide me. Well, what's this all about? Firstly, the electromagnetic fields that our antennas radiate are going to be coming under the limelight, so we need to make sure that we're compliant and not putting out too much power for those within a very near field to the antenna. On the most part, this is absolutely fine, as I will show you today. And I, as a responsible fellow human being and radio amateur, obviously want to use my radio safely, and I don't want that to impact other people who are not part of the hobby. So I totally understand the need to do this. Now, whatever I say now, I'm going to lose half my audience. So please bear with me. If I say, and I'm sure many of you are thinking this, Ofcom, the police, whoever, are never going to be able to police this. Don't waste your time with it. Forget about it. That doesn't sit well with me. You see, for me, that's a bit like saying you can drive home from the pub because the chance of there being a police officer out there is so minimal. Well, yeah, that's true. You probably could get away with that. But we also know now from the science that EMF does cause harm to people, and therefore we need to be responsible as we use the hobby. But as I think I'll explain quite well and convincingly in this video, the standards by which this is being measured by Ofcom seems absolutely ludicrous, and we'll get onto that in a bit. So for those of you naysayers who would just say, oh, forget about it, just carry on, they'll never catch you, you're probably right, but that isn't in the spirit of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to be a good citizen, and therefore I want to try and be compliant and show that I'm compliant, just in case anyone ever does knock on the door, as unlikely as that will be. Many of you will say our local repeater gets plagued by pirates, absolutely ruining the hobby. Ofcom do nothing about it. They'll never sort of get back to someone who's being compliant. I think you're probably right, but still, I don't want to take that chance, and I want to be responsible with the hobby. So that's why I'm trying to be compliant. That's what I'm aiming for here. And actually, I think it's very easy to be compliant most of the time, but as I show you towards the end of this video, not all of the time, and that's kind of what makes me a bit grumpy. Secondly, a lot of people will be saying this doesn't impact foundation license holders, because this new change that they're bringing to the license is only for people using 10 watts or more, and therefore it doesn't apply to foundation license holders. That isn't true. This does apply to foundation license holders, which is why those of you who have got M7s will have received the email from Ofcom, because it does directly impact you. You see, as a foundation license holder, we're able to use 10 watts PEP, which is essentially 10 watts that's going into the antenna, which means there's nothing wrong with a foundation holder using, I mean, it'd be a stupid idea, but using 100 watts into a very, very long lossy feeder, as long as at the base of the antenna, you only are radiating, you're only putting in 10 watts into the antenna, 10 watts PEP. However, this new Ofcom thing, this EMF thing that we all need to look at, is for 10 watts EIRP. So that is effective radiated power by comparison to the, the standard isotropic, brilliant theoretical antenna. There's nothing wrong with a foundation license holder putting 10 watts into a very gainy antenna. I mean, you could have a Yagi with 50 elements in theory and put out a ridiculously huge amount of power from your 10 watts in a very tight beam, for example, and that would be putting out a lot more than 10 watts EIRP. So this does apply to anyone. In fact, I was looking earlier, and if I just put it, my little hand portable, so this only puts out 5 watts, so this won't come under the derivative, but this antenna here has no gain on it, or very little gain, so maybe it's putting out something like 6-7 watts EIRP. If I plug this into the antenna on the roof, just by connecting the little SMA to PL259 here and stick it on the roof, it would come under the derivative, because I would then be putting out something like 14, 15 watts ERIP because of the gain of the antenna. So it is one that will impact everyone, or at least it's what we should bear in mind. And the new legislation clearly says that even when I'm using this, if it's coming in at under 10 watts, then I need to record that somewhere. So I probably need in my list of radios, this radio listed with this antenna, just to say this is well under the 10 watts, and therefore I haven't kept any further records on it. But my reading of the rules is that ought to happen to be fully compliant. Again, those of you will decide whether or not you want to go to that sort of level of detail. I'm sure Ofcom aren't particularly interested in hand portable, but the idea is still there, and of course the rules work. The second thing that fascinated me about this is the public is not the general public. So people who walk past your house, you sort of think they're the general public. But this also involves your husband or wife, your children, your lodger, your neighbours. I understand why it involves your neighbours, but I would have thought that the household would have been exempt, because everyone in the household knows what I'm doing in my spare time and knows therefore that there's going to be EMF in the house. Therefore I need to think, how is this impacting my family as well as the general public? So that was news to me as I read through it. Essentially, anything that's giving out under 10 watts EIRP doesn't need a full calculation doing, but you do still need a record of it. Anything over 10 watts, therefore, does need a calculation done. And in the link to this video, underneath this video, I've put a link to the RSGB's sort of first draft of a calculator. It's really helpful actually, because what it does very cleverly is has 3 different sections. I'll show it you in a minute. It has 3 different sections. It talks about what radio you're using and how much power you're putting out, and what mode and that sort of thing, because of course that makes a big difference. FM is very different to SSB, for example, in terms of how much power it's actually putting out. It talks about your feeder as well, because of course if you're putting out 100 watts from your transmitter, it doesn't necessarily mean 100 watts is getting to the antenna. So it takes into account feeder losses, and then also what sort of antenna you're using. You know, a half-wave dipole is going to be a lot different than a 15-element Yagi. So it sort of takes all that into consideration. It also makes quite clear that we are to presume that members of the public who could have access do have access. So my house has a wall right next to this window here, and the other side is a public footpath. People walk past it. I've never known anyone stop and set out a picnic blanket and spend 3 hours there, but in theory they could, and therefore the Ofcom rules assume that there is a member of the public that has decided to make it their business to just sit directly on the other side of my wall with their back against the wall as close to my antenna as possible for the next 3 weeks, and they're going to be there constantly. So that's the sort of level of detail. So you can't say, oh well, yeah, it's a footpath, but no one ever actually stays there. It's not like there's a view, there's only a wall, so it's not like there's a view. Whereas actually this says, no, you've got to assume that there's someone there. Likewise, your neighbour in your garden, it's no good to say, well, you know, my neighbour's 83 and they only go in the garden for about 2 days a year. I'll just make sure I don't transmit then. You've got to assume that there's someone there all the time, which actually contradicts something further down, which says if you see someone in the near field, then you're to stop transmitting. So I don't quite know how to square that off at this section, but there seems to be a presumption that if someone could be there, they should be. And then it talks about things like warning signs. So if you can't get people outside your near field, then you could either put warning signs up to keep people back, or a barrier up to keep people back. But of course, this involves people in our own house. I mean, what am I meant to do? Put warning signs on all of the doors saying, get out your house because I'm transmitting. It seems a little bit ridiculous. The compliance is also to do with mobile antennas as well. So if you go mobile, obviously you need to think it's a bit more lenient with mobile, I think, because it says, look, you just need to do the calculation once and then create the same system again. So if you're someone who does SOTA activation, you're going to do 5 activations in one day climbing some mountains. You don't have to do 5 bits of paperwork. In fact, the bit of paperwork you did the last time, if you're using the same rig, the same antenna, then obviously you can just go for it. Each time you set something else up, you need to reassess it. Now, for something that's like screwed onto the roof and is a permanent installation, that's fine, isn't it? It's 2 seconds of paperwork and then you're done. Whereas for those of us who like trying lots of different antennas and making antennas and building things, every time we change the setup, according to these rules, we are to then go through the process of calculating to see what the testers. Now, the good news at the moment, and I say at the moment, and you'll see from what I'm about to put out, is not good news long term, but the good news for the moment is that under 10 megahertz doesn't fall into this. Whilst there is still the idea that you should be compliant around it, is not legislative. So under 10 megahertz, you don't need to make these calculations yet, unless Ofcom say to you, I want you to prove it. But as you're about to see, under 10 megahertz is where the real fun and games begin, because the near field becomes absolutely huge. So what do you need to do? You need to carry out an assessment. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Use a calculator and then record it, either print it off and put it in a filing cabinet, or just save it on your computer so that you've got it there. I would imagine if you're non-compliant and haven't done any work to try and show your compliance, then that's where you'll get the book thrown at you. Whereas if you've tried your best to be compliant, if you're then found to be non-compliant and you've got all of the paperwork, that's actually really helpful. Think of it a bit like a risk assessment. Those of you who work in jobs where you have sort of a public role, you have to do a risk assessment to keep the public risk. Now, a risk assessment doesn't mean that there is no risk. It simply says that you've identified the risks and tried your best to minimize them wherever you can. And I guess that's what this is talking about here. So we're trying to show that we've done all that we can to be compliant. And I've got some examples for you as to what that looks like. And if we can't get people outside of our near field, then we're told not to transmit when the public are around. Now, I don't know quite what that means yet. Is it all right to sort of, I don't know, set a little camera up so I can see what's over my wall and stop transmitting if someone's there or not? I haven't quite worked out what all that means yet. But the other thing that it says is only use it intermittently. And this is another question that I've got. What does that actually mean? So if you can't stop people coming into your near field, just use your radio intermittently and put some minimization, sort of risk minimization in there to say, well, I'm only going to transmit for a short amount of time. So even if people are in the near field, then that's fine. Now, this is how I think, and I hope that Ofcom will give some clarity at some point, but this is how I think we can get around this. So if you're a radio amateur like me, you know, I only use the radio for, I don't know, 3 hours a week, something like that, 4 hours a week. Now, if I could average the amount of transmit time over the week, I could say to my neighbours, although you might be in my near field, as a proportion over the week, I'm massively reducing it, because if I'm using the radio 4 hours a week, I might only be transmitting for an hour and a half a week, something like that. And therefore, over a whole week, an hour and a half is very small amounts of EMF. But at the moment, it seems like they're looking at a 6-minute window, and you've got to assume that this is one of the 6 minutes that you are actually transmitting rather than one of the 6 minutes you're not. And therefore, if it's over a 6-minute window, you might be transmitting 50% of the time. But what I'm finding on the calculators is there seems to be this sort of floor and ceiling, and when you go beneath the floor, it doesn't matter how much power or how long you're using the radio for, there's this huge distance that needs imposing. Let me show you what I've done on the computer and see if you can see what I can see. Okay, so first things first, let's have a look at the antenna. You remember I've got this G5RV full size that is hoisted up to about 9-10 meters in the air, and the collinears on top of it. The wires for the G5RV go down into the garden, and this is just guyed off because the garden isn't quite long enough, which means that it's pretty close to the perimeter of the house, and so I need to bear that in mind when doing these calculations. You'll see it's about 1.5 meters, 2 meters from the edge of the house. So let's go on to EMF. I've gone onto Google, a little search for EMF calculator RSGB or something like that. You'll find it at the top of the list. This is a really good resource. You'll see some links on there to read up more, but part way down the page you can download the EMF calculator. You'll need Excel to use it, but I imagine you could import it into something like Google Sheets if you wanted to enable editing, and this is what you have to do. And you'll have to do this a few times, so may as well get it right first time. You put in your call sign and your name and the date, and then essentially you'll see these 3 boxes about the radio, the feeder and the antenna, and you just need to complete and fill in all the yellow boxes that then enable you to get an assessment to how much distance you will need between the public and your antenna. So let's start with my Retevis RT90. This is the main one that I use for FM on 2 meters and 70. So we'll leave the band as FM. We'll change the transmit mode to, leave the band as 2 meters. Change the transmit mode to FM. It's a 50-watt radio, and I'll probably be speaking half of the time and listening half of the time, because that's kind of how conversation works. I've got some, it's actually Hyperflex 10, but it's very similar to EcoFlex 10, so it'll have the same sort of losses. And I bought 16 meters and I had to cut 1 meter off, so I know it's 15 meters long up to the antenna, and the antenna is the Diamond X200N. So I'm going to put it as custom because I actually know how much gain it's got, and on 2 meters it's got 6 dB gain. And then I scroll down to the bottom, and it's 9 meters, 10 meters off the ground, 9.5 I think it is, so I'll put 9 in, and I scroll down and it shows me that I need 3.5 meters separation between the public and the antenna. Well, that's absolutely fine because it's 9 meters above the ground. Even to my little boy's bedroom, which is directly underneath the antenna, it's more than 3.5 meters. So I'm totally compliant. So all I need to do is save this to show that I'm compliant when using my Retevis RT90 on 2 meters FM. Using the maximum power. Now, I very rarely use the maximum power. Far more frequently I'll use maybe 5 watts or 10 watts or whatever. Well, that's obviously going to be compliant because it's less power. So try for worst case scenario and the rest will happen. Do the same again then for 70 cm. So on the 70 cms band, I know that it's actually got a gain, slightly more gain of 8 dB, but all the other settings are exactly the same, of course, apart from the power. Its power output at 70 cms is only 45 watts. So I'll just need to change that to 45 watts and 3.7 meters. Again, totally compliant, no problems at all. So all I need to do is save that. Now you're getting into the pattern. All you've got to do is one of these quick calculations for every mode of radio that you use. Now, you might think that that's actually quite a lot of work. It will take just a few minutes, and most of the time, and I say most of the time in a cautionary way, most of the time you're going to be totally compliant. Another radio that I use is my Yaesu FT817, and obviously this is a portable rig, and I'll show you how to do the portable calculation for a Yagi in just a moment, but yeah, I mean, just carry on. Whether you're using it on FM or SSB, it's only a 5-watt output radio, so I already know that it's going to be compliant plugged into the same antenna on the roof. This is what I do sometimes for the monthly UHF VHF competitions on a Tuesday evening run by the RSGB. I know it's a vertical collinear and I need a proper Yagi, but I can still get 10 or 15 contacts, and I do enjoy the contests. So yeah, pretty easy to do. Do the 2 meter one as well. I mean, you'll see it's so quick and easy to do. There's only 1.4 meters separation, so I know that I'm absolutely fine on all these. But yeah, quick and easy to do. And then also need to do it, of course, for the sideband. Now, sideband's a bit different. There seems to be 2 options on here for sideband, either SSB or processed SSB, and I guess that's to do with a speech compressor. It seems to put it up a bit. So again, just using worst case scenario, I'm assuming SSB processed is using a speech compressor, which I do use on SSB. And again, you can go down and see, okay, less than a meter separation. So again, we're absolutely fine on these, and it's just a case of saving them. You can either print them out, or I imagine a soft copy in this day and age is perfectly fine. Just keep these in a file somewhere. If anyone ever knocks on your door, of course, they can just look at the date that this file was created and see that I made it back in March 2021 and therefore was compliant then, and it shows that I've been a compliant customer, let's say, so they can be happy with me. And again, if I do this on 2 meters, the gain is obviously different on the antenna, but again, 0.8 of a meter, absolutely fine. I've got no problems at all. So they're the main modes that I'm using through my collinear. So that's all done and dusted. And as you can see, it really doesn't take long at all to do these quick calculations. And most of the time, you're going to be totally compliant. I mean, you don't have to be far up in terms of height to be, you know, a couple of meters away from everyone's head or whatever. So you're absolutely fine. So that was a helpful exercise, easy to do. This is where it gets more fun, using the ICOM 7300. So firstly, I've got access to more power, but also different bands. Let's try for the 20 meter band. I'd use a speech compressed SSB. Let's try it for worst case scenario, 100 watts from my transmitter. I'm only talking 50% of the time, worst case scenario. I use, don't judge me on this, RG58. It's only a 3 meter stretch. Oh, that's the wrong box. It should be down there. 3 meter stretch, so it doesn't lose much at all at 20 meters. Obviously, at VHF, UHF, it's a terrible cable to use, but it's fine for what I'm doing here. And I use the G5RV, almost my call sign. Good old G5RV. Great antennas, and yeah, I really enjoy using those. Loads of different antennas listed on here, although what you'll find here is whichever antenna you choose, you get that box of separation, 1.7 meters, which is absolutely fine, is shaded in. And I've actually emailed to ask why. It says, if shaded red, then the near field assessment is recommended. I think what that means is you need to use the figure above it, the 3.4 meters, rather than 1.7. Now, 3.4 meters means on 20 meters at the moment, I would be non-compliant because that antenna is so close to the back gate of my house, which goes into my, or back fence I should say, which goes into my neighbour's house. So if they're in the garden, they would be in my near field. Anyway, what I need to do is bring it in about a metre. That should be fine. Absolutely fine to bring it in a metre, and then I'm compliant again. And again, my little boy in his bedroom at about 4 metres, 5 metres or whatever, that's absolutely fine because the loft is quite big, so I know that he's far enough away. The front garden's less of a problem because it's on a fishing pole 10 metres high. So I know I'm totally compliant, or I'm not yet compliant on 20 metres. That's what this has shown me. I'm now just working my way through all of the bands and just saving them as I go. Anyway, going back to the Yaesu 817, if I was going to set up on 2 meters using my Yagi, you'll see a video of how I made this Yagi for portable operation. Do have a look at that if you want to. It's only using 5 watts again, and I'd use a short, 3 meters of RG58 is probably about right. But of course I'm using a 6-element Yagi. That's what I created for things like SOTA activations. I wanted it to be portable, and you'll see here that on SSB using the speech compressor, obviously I'm not 9 meters in the air, I'm far less than that because it's just on the ground on a tripod. I need Ofcom separation of 1.1 meters. So what I'm going to do is save that and just put a little note with it to remind myself that I need to make sure the public is 1.1 meters away from any point of the antenna. Now, I'm not going to start putting signs up on the top of a mountain to show that, but if someone comes over to talk to me, I might want to just cease transmission and just ask them to step away or something like that, or explain to them that you know, it's radiating, and you know, it's their own risk if they want to come closer, or I don't know what I would do there. But it's only 1.1 meters, so that sounds absolutely fine. Now this is the issue. Let's go down to 30 meters. Putting out 0.1 watts for 1% of the time using my G5RV. So 0.1 watts, that is next to nothing. And I'm transmitting 1% of the time. And have a look at this. I need 4.7 meters as a near field zone. That means that my garden is pretty much too small. Doesn't matter what settings you change, you still need that minimum of 4.7 meters. So let's go up to a full 400 watts. I don't have the capability to do that, but I could on my license. And let's transmit 90% of the time. Have a look at this. It's still just 4.7 meters. So whether I'm using 0.1 watts 1% of the time or 400 watts 90% of the time, I need to have the same 4.7 meters distance on the 30 meter band. To me, that is absolutely bonkers. 0.1 watts for 1% of the time does not need you to be 5 meters away from the antenna. Surely it's ridiculous. Now I notice there's this flaw on every band, and obviously as you go up the wavelengths that becomes less and less and less, but at 30 meters, which does fall under this jurisdiction, it's a long way. If you drop it down to top band, you need a 25.1 meter gap from any point on the antenna. That means the whole of my house, all of my neighbours, the street next to us is definitely in the near field of view. That is game over for me. There is no way, it doesn't matter what antenna you use, there is no way you can be 25 meters away from it. If we're to take this compliance seriously, and they do bring in this compliance on the bigger bands on 80 and on 160, it's going to be game over. Look, on 80 meters, doesn't matter what power you use, doesn't matter what antenna you use, it's the same, 13 meters. Well, I hope that's been a helpful video. I have to say, I'm a little bit grumpy about it. I think if the 40 meter, 80 meter, 160 meter bands come into this, that's game over for me, because my garden just simply isn't big enough, nowhere near big enough. And my house isn't big enough, and therefore the whole of my house would be in the near field, my neighbours, the public, and therefore it really would be game over. But I don't understand why transmitting 0.1 watts for 1% of the time would need a 25 meter gap. I mean, my mobile phone charger seems to create more noise on the band than 0.1 watts. I mean, it just strikes me as bonkers. And I guess if anyone from the RSGB is watching this, or anyone from Ofcom is watching this, to the RSGB I would say, please fight this for us. I mean, as a member of the RSGB, I'm like, I totally get that we want to be safe. I totally get that we want to be compliant. But at the same time, this is ridiculous, particularly for the lower bands, or top band, 160, 80 meter band. I mean, just ridiculous. And whilst I want to be compliant at the same time, I want to enjoy my hobby, and it feels like, dare I say it, this is a bit of a nail in the coffin. And unfortunately, because of who I am, and I've sort of got these morals and ethics, and particularly as my role as a vicar, I can't just say, well, I'm just going to break the rules and forget about it, mate. I don't think that's the answer here. I think the answer is better legislation that takes into account that we are not a 5G mast that is kicking out signal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're amateurs who perhaps at best are using it 3 or 4 hours in a day. That's if you're really hooked on the hobby. But for most of us, it's just a couple of hours a week, and it just feels so overkill. So my plea is, please reconsider. I'll be writing to Ofcom and to the RSGB so that they can lobby on my behalf as well. I would encourage you to do the same, because I just sense that this is not a helpful step forward for the hobby and is massively overkill. Anyway, that's my tuppence. What have I missed? Tell me in the comments below. Perhaps I've got all this wrong. Perhaps you have done some better research than I have. Help me out here. I really need a bit of help. And if you've watched this and you've enjoyed, do have a look around the rest of my channel as well. It's all there for you to enjoy. If you like the channel, subscribe, and you can then catch up with other videos that will be happening. But for now, I'm a little bit grumpy, I'll be honest, but I am still Ben. I'm G5 REV, and I'm off and clear. 7-3. This is Golf 5, Romeo Echo Victor, G5 REV calling secure, standing by for any calls.